Welcome back. In Palestine, thousands of people flee East Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip after the Israeli government ordered the evacuation following its intentions to invade the city. The Palestinian resistance movement Hamas claimed that in a statement that the Tel Aviv regime is preparing a large-scale ground offensive without considering the humanitarian catastrophe. The Palestinian refugees forcibly left their camps to head towards central and western Rafah with intentions to go to western Khan Yunis and northern Deir al-Balah. Hamas warned that preparations for Israel's ground offensive in Rafah neglect the fate of hostages held captive in the territory and threaten hundreds of thousands of civilians. We go now to Gaza, where our correspondent Huda Hegazi will talk about the sudden movement of Israeli military mechanisms to the west of Rafah governorate in the southern Gaza Strip.
At this moment,
Palestinian sources have reported the sudden movement of Israeli military mechanisms to the west of Rafah governorate in the southern Gaza Strip. And within minutes, Israel military mechanism west of the Rafah governorate, south of the Gaza Strip, and minutes later, the Hebrew ladder, Hebrew Channel 14 and 13, as well as the official Israeli army radio, announced the start of the military operations by the Israeli army here in Rafah Governorate, south of the Gaza Strip. However, this operation has come to light after the proclamation by the Hamas movement hour before the proclamation of the agreement to the proposal sent by Egypt and Qatar to reach an understanding with Israel on exchange of hostages and a humanitarian truce. And all Hasidis were hopeful that Israel's response will be positive and that it will also accept, as Hamas has done, that there will be an end to the hostilities, or at least that a humanitarian truce will be proclaimed here in the Gaza Strip. But nevertheless, after the proclamation of this acceptance by Hamas a few hours later, the ground operation here in Rafah has already been proclaimed and has begun in Rafah. According to Palestinian sources, military tanks are already beginning to move into Rafah West area and are operating and progressively attacking these areas. But it is important to note that it was only at 7 a.m. today that Israel began to warn and order the Hasidis to evacuate, and therefore their Hasidis not even have 24 hours to evacuate. But Israeli immediately started this ground operation. There are many Hasidis who have not had time to evacuate and are now in a very dangerous situation. On the other hand, the Security Council of War is now assured that it is ready to send an Israeli delegation to Cairo to continue the negotiations, and therefore we can see how Israel is carrying out two operations at the same time. The first one is to continue with the negotiations, but also to continue with this military operation, and also the Israeli War Council has assured that it will continue with this military operation. Israel has assured that it will continue with its plans and its strategies of the military operation here in Rafah Governorate, and will send a delegation to Egypt in the next few days to continue the negotiations with Hamas. And therefore, we can say precisely and directly that Israel is working with both options. The first option is to continue with the ground operation that had been called for both National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich had called for. On the other hand, the continuation of the truce negotiations and exchange of has requested by War Ministers Yoav Gallant and Benny Gantz, and therefore we can see that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to do is to try to satisfy the two sides, and we will see that what is expected in the coming days, whether the military operations will continue, whether Israel will continue to push further into the Rafah Governorate, or whether it will accept this agreement with Hamas and proclaim this agreement with Hamas an humanitarian truce and an exchange of hostages.
The Israeli government says it will continue its invasion of the Gaza Strip despite pressure from international bodies and the international community. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed not to bow to international pressure to end the siege of the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu reiterated that no decision from any international forum would stop the incursion into Rafah and that he would continue the fight despite the lack of support from his allies. With more than 34,000 Palestinians killed, the international community and Israel's main allies have called for a slowdown or even a halt to the offensive, but Netanyahu insists the fighting will continue.
The regime must accept the ceasefire agreement. Otherwise, the families of the prisoners will burn Israel.